Why don't we join in just saying the blessing for Torah? Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu Lasok b'divrei Torah, Lasok b'divrei Torah, Hafoch ba, Lasok b'divrei Torah, Yedai-dai-dai-dai-dai, 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 Yedai-dai-dai-dai. So I feel like it's been a little while since we've all been together with Thanksgiving. And I'm just really glad that we get to continue studying together. This week, we're looking at the Torah portion, Miket. So we're well into our story of Joseph. And of course, we know that in last week's Torah portion, there was a whole lot that went on between Joseph and his brothers. He had been thrown into a pit. He had been sent to serve Potiphar and his wife. From there, he had landed in jail. And that's essentially where we had left off. So this week, we're going to start with some of that story, but also we're going to have a chance to move forward a little more into it as well. And from the Musar Torah commentary, as many of you will know, the theme of this week is emunah, which is often translated as faith, but of course has many more nuances to it than that. Before we dive in, any questions or any initial thoughts from reading the Musar Torah commentary? Oh, Irv, are you trying to say something? You're muted.
What page are we on?
That is a phenomenal question. Does anyone have the physical book? I have it online, which doesn't give me the exact page.
63.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're going to be going through it in our text sheet today, of course.
I didn't read the text sheets yet, but I did have a chance to look at this chapter. Man, I think you could spend a week on this chapter and the whole idea of faith. It really was a lot of information for me. And I think faith has been, for me, on my Jewish journey, one of the most dynamic aspects of it. And it seems to be changing, or it has been changing. I don't know if I'll ever be able to settle down and come to terms with it, if you will, but maybe that's okay. I don't begrudge it at all. I just feel like every time I address this issue, excuse me, my brain goes so fast, I can't keep up with myself.
Can I add something, Marla? Faith is very emotional. Our emotions constantly are changing. It's not something you intellectualize and you search out for facts. Faith is incredibly emotional, and that changes throughout life. So it's not surprising that it's dynamic.
Yeah, I also wonder if it's worthwhile to take a step back and even ask, what does faith mean to all of us? What does that word even mean? Because it's so complicated. Irv, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I just like Larry's comments.
I like to change faith into trust. Faith in God is trusting God.
So what does that mean? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Not belief. In fact, when I first looked at the first page, the author hadn't used the word trust, but later on he uses the word trust a lot.
Yeah.
in religion, we believe or we have faith. They're different. And blind faith can lead you away from trusting God. But blind belief can lead you away from trusting God. But faith allows you that freedom to keep on growing and keep on growing as you know more and more about God and your relationship with him. So I like the word trust.
Beautiful. Thanks for bringing that in. Anyone else have any thoughts on this?
It was a little confusing. No, maybe a lot confusing for me. The idea of why Pharaoh made the decisions that Pharaoh did. And the way it's explained here is that because I guess Pharaoh admired Joseph's faith and that elevated him to a place where Pharaoh could make some decisions.
Great. We're going to get to exactly those quotes that you're referring to a little bit later. So I want you to bring all of those questions then, because they're really good ones. And Rabbi Catherine, were you saying something? I think you were muted, but you were trying to say something.
I always turn it the wrong way. So I agree with both Marla and Larry. And I think that faith, that emunah, that what we trust, what we surrender to and allow ourselves to be changed by, changes over the course of our life. I think a lot right now about being in the fourth quarter of my life, which is the final quarter. And so what does that mean? What have I learned? What do I have to contribute? What is my role? What is my journey now? So I've actually been thinking about it really a lot.
Important thoughts to have, certainly for all of us, whatever stage we're at. Well, why don't we dive into this portion and start being able to get to some of these quotes that some of us read. And for those of us who didn't have a chance, that's okay. We're all going to get there together. So I started this text sheet with a little piece of Torah from last week's Torah portion because it sets the stage. And this, of course, is related. Wait, hold on 1 second. Okay, right. Trying to remember what it was that I did. I got it. So this is kind of setting the stage of what Marla was talking about. It says sometime later, and that's sometime after Joseph had been in prison, essentially. He'd been in prison for some time. There had been the cupbearer and the baker who were in prison with him. So it says sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt gave offense to their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two courtiers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the chief steward, in the same prison house where Joseph was confined. The chief steward assigned Joseph to them, and he attended them. When they had been in custody for some time, both of them, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, dreamed in the same night, each his own dream, and each dream with its own meaning. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were distraught. He asked Pharaoh's courtiers who were with him in custody in his master's house, saying, "Why do you appear downcast today?" And they said to him, "We had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." So Joseph said to them, "Surely God can interpret. Tell me your dreams." And we know that Joseph will correctly interpret both of them. But we look at this last word, this last verse here that I included, and Joseph's response to them is, "Surely God can interpret. Tell me your dreams." So why do you think he responded that way? And what does his response say about his state of mind?
Well, it gets him off the hook if the dreams, if his interpretation isn't right, because
So it's God's fault.
it's God's fault. Yeah. Yeah.
See,
I mean,
I
he's
was
gotten in
thinking-
trouble before for interpreting.
It just seems to be flashing back to when he was a teenager and he was rather presumptuous. He is the conduit for God. He assumes that responsibility, that significance. Seems kind of strange to me.
So you see this as an arrogance here.
Yeah. God can interpret. Tell me your dream. How about saying, tell God your dream, or something like that? You know, he's presenting himself as the conduit, and I think that's rather presumptuous at this point, anyway. I mean, it turns out to be right, but how do we know that at that point?
Mhm.
And it implies that all through this being tossed in the pit and being enslaved and now you're in prison for God knows how long. And I guess God does know that Joseph maintains his belief and his partnership, we would almost have to say, with God. I can see why he would say that, where the question would rise, how can he speak for God? But you got to remember, he's in there with all those Egyptians who have a whole lot of gods, who do not share the same background theologically at all.
That's absolutely true.
So if we can say that Joseph, prior to this, was a pretty arrogant kid, if you will, immature is the word that comes to my mind, then in answering this question, then I wonder if he's moving towards, if he has this true relationship with faith, with emunah, with God, then perhaps he's maturing, or he'll be observed as someone who is this capable interpreter of dreams, who is mature. It seems like this is a transition point.
Mm-hmm.
A possible transition point. I shouldn't say definitively.
Mhm. So maybe there is a distinction. And actually, why don't we go back to the earlier story? Sorry, I'm scrolling all the way down because I included this piece where he's talking to his brothers, and he does indeed have dreams himself that he interprets. It says, actually, does anyone want to read this text? Any takers?
I'll read if you like.
Thank you, Steve.
Once Joseph had a dream, which he told to his brothers, and they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then suddenly my sheaf stood up and remained upright, when your sheaves gathered round and bowed low to my sheaf." His brothers answered, "Do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us?" And they hated him even more for his talk about his dreams. He dreamed another dream and told his brothers, saying, "Look, I have had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told it to his father and brothers, his father berated him. What he said to him is, "This dream you have dreamed. Are we to come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow low to you to the ground?" So his brothers were wrought up with him, and his father kept the matter in mind.
Okay, so I think that that's like the immaturity and the boastfulness that we're talking about from earlier, right?
Right.
Is there a distinction between how he acts here and his response to the cupbearer and the baker in this first text?
Well, as a teenager, the dreams were all about him. He is the center. And on this other experience, he's not the center. He's just going to act as the conduit.
Okay, so you sense an
yeah.
arrogance in both, Steve, is what you're saying, but it's directed differently. It's not quite as self-centered.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
No.
I think there's a big difference between the two. The first one, when he's with his family, is my, me, not a mention of God, not once. And in this one, his response is, God can interpret. It's a huge change.
So are you saying that he is displaying humility here?
I'm saying that he's even mentioning God, and particularly in an environment which is not Jewish and does not have one God, has a whole lot of them out there. His surely God can interpret. You've got to believe in God to be saying surely God can interpret. And there's not really, that is not very explicit in the earlier part. I'd say it's not explicit at all.
It's not his dream, right? It's the other people's dream.
That's
Yes.
correct. Yeah.
Well, that'd be one reason to behave differently.
You're wondering what? Sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
I said, if he had the same dream, or had the dream and not they having the same, the story wouldn't have been as effective. It's their dream, and he's acting to assist them.
Mm-hmm.
As Steve said, he's a go between the medium or someone to help them understand their own dream. Maybe in their faith or religions there or God's structure, they didn't talk to God or ask God or anything.
Probably not.
You know, in that first series of dreams, which is about Joseph, right? So he's a young boy and he's sharing his dream. So if you look at it from the perspective of a young person sharing their dream, there's nothing wrong with that. He's just telling him what he dreamed. But I think it's significant how everyone responded to it, because God talks to us in dreams. And maybe there's that sense of jealousy that, wow, God is talking to Joseph. Why isn't he talking to us? Or Joseph is open enough to hear God. And in the second set of dreams, Joseph doesn't talk about God in the story a lot. You know, it's not about how he practices faith or any of that. And yet his response is, you know, I can interpret this because of God. So he has an underlying really strong faith running through him, is the way I view this, and his confidence that this is, again, something that's God-given. Let me interpret what it is that God is saying. So I just see it in that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, at the very beginning, he doesn't talk about God.
Right.
And
No.
here he does. What he could say is, oh, I'm the best at interpreting dreams. I can always do that. He could have just stroked his own ego, right? It has nothing to do with God. It's all me. I'm just the best, right?
But
But
it never
that's not
says
what
that.
he does here.
Isn't it a little surprising, after all that just transpired in his life, that he would even believe in God? I mean, he's been through hell.
Exactly. And that's why the focus of this is emunah. How is it that he comes to develop this sense of emunah, the sense of trust, the sense of faith, even despite everything? I mean, he's betrayed by his brothers, thrown in a pit, almost left for dead, sold into slavery. He goes somewhere, like they throw him in prison after accusing him of things, even after he did what was right. Like thing after thing just kept happening to him that he didn't deserve. And it's really kind of remarkable who he becomes despite it.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to look at a few different interpretations of this last line here, where he says, surely God can interpret, tell me your dreams. Ibn Ezra says, its meaning is that the interpretation of the dreams belong to God, because God knows the future. God has revealed what is going to come to pass in a dream to one whom he selected, and it therefore makes no difference whether I interpret the dream for good or ill. Since this is so, and all interpretation belongs to God, do not be concerned about telling me your dreams. The rabbinic statement that all dreams follow the interpretation is the opinion of an individual sage. So he's saying it's not so much that I'm important. All divination, everything, every gift in this area, it always belongs to God and God alone. Excuse me. And Ramban which is Nachmanides, says, Rabbi Ibn Ezra explained, it is saying that future events destined to come as indicated in dreams belong to God, for he alone brings the dream and lets the future be known. And it is he who makes peace and creates evil. But in my speaking to you, there's neither benefit or loss. This he said so that they should not punish him if evil should befall them, or so they should tell him the dreams and not scorn him. So this is getting back to what you said, Jessica, right? He's saying it to help him get off the hook. It's not his fault if something terrible happens, right? It's all God. That's who it is. And then finally, just looking at a couple of texts by Ora Chaim here, it was a little bit of a later commentator. This was Joseph's way of saying that although he offered his services as an interpreter, they should not think that he claimed to boast about his ability. So this is saying it's the exact opposite of arrogance. He's trying not to boast about his ability. He's attributing it to God. But that God had many interpreters at his disposal. He, Joseph, was only one of them, and he invited to tell them their dreams. When Joseph referred to the interpretations in the plural, he alluded to a story from Talmud Brachot 55, according to which there were 24 regular dream interpreters in Jerusalem. All of them interpreted the dream of Rabbi Bana, each one offering a different interpretation. All of their interpretations happened to come true. This is what Joseph had in mind when he said, God has interpretations. Joseph meant that a dream is capable of many different interpretations, all of which are correct. And of course, there could be so many questions based on that. How could they all possibly be true if there's that many? But it's interesting, this little piece of diversity that's thrown in there. So any comments or questions about that?
Well, one thing to place it in context, people believed in oracles and omens and signs and entrails and all that. They went to people like that. They didn't talk directly to the gods. They had someone who interpreted through those physical things what God may have meant. So it's a completely different concept here. So how does he convince them, or how does he come across to these folk, or is it just a storyteller's vehicle to let him know that he has a way of seeing things in the future, and which elevates him in the eyes of Pharaoh? My own personal feeling about this, and it came close to that 24 interpretation thing. I think every one of us at some time in our life will have the feeling that we know something is going to happen really strongly. And that happened in my life for a period of time, and then it left me, and then my daughter kind of picked up on it. But it's not just like deja vu kind of thing, but and my own conclusion on that situation is that we take in information to our normal senses, and then we still have somewhere around surrounding us some other ways of accumulating things. They call them hunches and call them, but it bubbles up with some thought. And then sure enough, here that thought becomes pretty powerful and then actually comes to pass. So there's some of that going on in my mind when you said 24 different interpretations. Each person has this at different levels in their life, the ability to latch on to an idea that's not normally through the five senses we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for bringing that in. I mean, I wonder, of the people here, have any of us ever had experiences where it felt like something was channeling through us and it wasn't actually us who was doing something? It felt like it was coming from elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because I almost wonder if that's a piece of what's going on here too, which is very, very connected to what you're talking about, Irv. Thank you. I'm going to bring in a little bit from our Musar Torah commentary because we haven't done that yet. We've just been looking at the backstory here. And Rabbi Lisa Grant, who's one of my teachers at HGC, who I adore, she wrote, the key difference between the Joseph who taunts his brothers in Parashat Vayeshev and the more mature and humble Joseph of Miketz is that he has developed a steadfast faith in God, which helps him to become more aware of the consequences of his actions. His maturation takes place over time, only starting with the time he spends in Potiphar's house when he resists the attempted seduction by Potiphar's wife. Though he is wrongly accused and thrown into prison, he still holds fast to his faith. So it goes back to the question asked just a little while ago. How do you think he was able to do that?
Well, he's still alive. I mean, he could have been killed at any one of those junctures, especially being in prison, but instead he's made the helper to the guy who runs the prison.
Yeah, the Torah keeps saying that God is with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though he's in prison, he rises in ranks within the prison. So he becomes a trusted person.
I'm coming up with two answers right now. One is, maybe faith is just a question of choice, of making a decision. That when you ask, gosh, he's going through all these hard times, well, how could he wind up being a faithful person? Or no, wait, that's going too far. Why he had faith in God? Well, he could have chosen another direction, but he chose not to. He chose to have this faith in this relationship. So I'm wondering if that's my answer to what is faith. It's a decision we make. And then the question that posed, another one, why? Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom, right? Before you can then accept, kind of all of the 12-step programs. Maybe the bottom of the pit was his rock bottom experience, so that he could then be open to the notion of a higher power, of God, etc. That because I believe that God is present and God is everywhere. I just know that I'm sometimes not astute or aware of it. And something has to happen, or a comment, I listen to someone and I'm reminded, like that's why Torah study is so important to me. It's when I feel God presence.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all of that. I think that when we're talking about choice also, looking at this story of Potiphar, hold on one second. Looking at the story of Potiphar and Potiphar's wife, right? Joseph is in this position where Potiphar's wife is trying to seduce him. Now he knows that if he goes along with it, his place within Potiphar's house, he's going to be secure there, right? And he knows that if he holds on to his morals, that he is going to face consequences that aren't deserved. But at this moment, Joseph says, I know I'm going to have to live with consequences, but I'm going to do something that I can live with. I'm going to hold on to my morals. I'm going to hold on to my faith. I'm going to do what's right. And that to me is the moment where his character really begins to shine through. And he makes a conscious choice to become a person who is truly worthy of respect and admiration. So it gets back to your idea there, Marla, of choice. He could have chosen so many different things. And I can't even say that anyone would fault him for making a different choice. And yet he knows that he has to do what's right. So let's look at this text here. I think this is the last of the Torah text that I'm bringing in, which is when in this week's Torah portion, Pharaoh says, hey, this is my dream, interpret it for me. So Pharaoh fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 ears of grain solid and healthy, grew on a single stalk, but close behind them sprouted 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed the 7 solid and full ears. Pharaoh woke. It was a dream. Next morning, his spirit was agitated. He sent for all the magicians in Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh. The chief cupbearer then spoke up and said to Pharaoh, I must make mention today of my offenses. Once Pharaoh was angry with his servants and placed me in custody in the house of the chief steward together with the chief baker. And we had dreams the same night, he and I, each of us, a dream with a meaning of its own. A Hebrew youth was there with us, a servant of the chief steward, and when we told him our dreams, he interpreted them for us, telling each the meaning of his dream. And as he interpreted for us, so it came to pass. I was restored to my post, and the other was impaled. Thereupon Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was rushed to the dungeon, or from the dungeon. He had his hair cut and changed his clothes, and he appeared before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. Now I have heard it said of you that for you to hear a dream is to tell its meaning. Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, not I. God will see to Pharaoh's welfare. So this is an even more extreme version of what happened before, right? Pharaoh is saying, I heard you are the person to go to. And he said, it's not me, it's God. And shortly after, just a few verses later, the Torah continues saying, and Pharaoh said to his courtiers, could we find another like him, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? So Pharaoh comes to understand Joseph as a man who contains the Spirit of God. So what do you think it was that caused Pharaoh to see him in this light?
That's enormous chutzpah to have been taken out of the jail, cleaned up, shaved, and put in front of the number one person in Egypt whom you haven't met.
Yeah, he's in this really kind of scary position, isn't he? But this goes back to your question before, Marla, right? Like, how is it that Pharaoh comes to see him as a man with the Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God within him?
And then he doesn't think that there is another one. What does that say about his court and his, whatever the priests or whatever they're called?
So maybe that's the gift that Joseph gets or has, that he comes across as this person who has this faith, that he's made some different choices and behaviors, etc., so that then when the Pharaoh observed him, he could change his mind about him. I think when you incorporate knowledge and you bring it into your own frame of reference or life experience, like when you ask the question about a relationship with God, when we acknowledge those, we become different people. Evolving people, not different, evolving. And maybe that's what Pharaoh saw in Joseph. I don't know.
I have a
Thank you.
quick question. From the time that he interpreted the dream, does it discuss, I'm missing in my mind the text, where the length of time where the dream can be validated? I mean, did Pharaoh have his conversion about David to this godlike spirit immediately, or did he have to wait and see some proof of this thing?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, right? Because the proof doesn't come yet.
Right.
He makes this determination that Joseph is interpretation one must be correct, And two, that he is Ruach Elohim. He has the Spirit of God within him
Mhm.
before he sees proof that his dream interpretation is accurate. It is accurate, but Pharaoh doesn't actually know that yet.
Rabbi?
Yeah, Jessica, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a slightly different interpretation. Pharaoh, just a few verses up, Pharaoh consults his magicians and his wise men. Pharaoh is predisposed to see someone who maybe is being shaved nicely and dressed up nicely, and who interpreted at least one dream correctly. He's predisposed to saying, oh my gosh, you must have the Spirit of God in you because you look so good, although it doesn't say that. But I think, that was the way Pharaoh was leaning on account of that's how things were in those days. And so Joseph was lucky in that sense.
Yeah, he had luck on his side, to be sure.
And his interpretation makes sense. And maybe the way he presented it, maybe he indicates that there is a possible solution in some way. We don't really know what the word, well, we do know a lot of what he says. That Pharaoh, if this is true, that there's going to be this huge plague, and you're the top guy in Egypt, you would like to see, and it's good that we do see that he is concerned, not just for himself.
Yeah, I mean, this is also a place where Potiphar is very high up in command, right?
Mhm.
Joseph could have said, I'm going to get back at him. I'm going to take care of myself and I'm going to get back at him. But Joseph says, this is what the dream means. If you want your nation to be prepared and to get even richer by, planning ahead, I can help you do that. And the Pharaoh likes that, understandably, right?
Yeah, I think I think the solution is politically expedient as well, because he judges Joseph. He has got credibility. He's humble. He's saying, "Hey, it's not me." And the solution is if you're an administrator or bureaucrat, saying, "Hey, all you have to do is just set aside, tax some more." I'm sure that wasn't unpleasant to his ears, and set aside some stuff for the next number of years. That's a great solution.
I have some troubles. This is all portrayed as part of God's plan. God sees into the future. God is the mover here. You talk about Joseph having choices. No, I don't think so. God is setting the whole thing in motion. He knows the outcome. He takes the steps to ensure that it happens. I don't think has anyone made any choice at all.
I mean, that's one way of viewing it. It's not how the Torah portrays it, right? Because first of all, God, according to most Jewish ideas, is outside of time. So it's not that God is seeing into the future. It's that God is present in every present. There is no future, there is no past, there's just God. And this idea of free will that you're bringing in here, could it be possible that God knows what is happening while also people have the ability to make choices for themselves?
So on that theme, and going back to Marla's point about the choices, what I think is fascinating is that this Pharaoh doesn't seem to have a heart that is hardened to God, like the one that we have in Exodus. So this Pharaoh is open to hearing God's voice in his mind and in his heart, which is significant in how this plays out with Joseph. But the one that we see in Exodus, we're told, had a hardened heart, didn't hear, didn't make a difference, no matter all the incredible miracles that took place. It wasn't phasing that Pharaoh in the least bit. So a huge difference in terms of faith and listening, openness to God's presence. Very
good point. Thank you. there's this one commentary I brought in based on this verse, right? Where Abarbanel says, what did Pharaoh see to say to his servants, could we find another like him, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? And that he said to him, there is no one wise and understanding like you. And that he made him the master over his entire household and ruler of the entire land of Egypt before he knew whether his words would be sustained or whether the thing would come to effect as he had interpreted it or not. As behold, the chief wine steward did not do a thing for just this reason when he interpreted his dream positively, as maybe the thing would not be as he had interpreted it to Pharaoh. And if so, why did he raise him before the thing was tested? So there was no proof here. And yet, perhaps because the Pharaoh was predisposed to believing in something, perhaps because he saw something in Joseph that truly showed him to be filled with the Ruach of Adonai, or perhaps for some other reason entirely, the Pharaoh was convinced that he was destined to be and bring goodness to the land of Egypt. So let's go back to some of the things that Rabbi Grant spoke about here. Does anyone want to read this text about Joseph?
I will.
Thank you so much.
Is this a
Yeah, that's up, yeah.
manly of faith, a pathway to patience, courage, and acceptance in the Musar Torah commentary? Joseph becomes trustworthy as an interpreter and as viceroy of Egypt because he has put his trust in God. Thus, he indeed merits Pharaoh's claim that he is endowed with Rashahim, the Spirit of God. Bizel, another key biblical character, is also endowed with Mich. Both he and Joseph can be seen as creators, planners, and builders. He's entrusted with the design and construction of the Mishkan and the portable tabernacle Israelites used throughout their wanderings in the wilderness to ensure their spiritual survival. In a parallel move, Joseph builds storehouses for grain to assure Egypt's physical survival. These two biblical characters makes them trustworthy servants and allows the creative work of their hands to flourish.
Thank you so much. So here we have physical things, ways in which they demonstrate through actions their faith and their trustworthiness, which therefore it demonstrates their emunah and it encourages other people to have trust in them.
Actions speak louder than words alone. And you know, with the Bezalel and the other, you know, constructing the Mishkan and so on, their actions and their choices back up, you know, their allegiance to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely true. And sometimes the way in which they speak words, right? The way in which Joseph said, no, it's all because of God. I give God all the credit.
Right.
That is something in itself that kind of can demand some respect.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you've come across a lot of things by Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt, but I came across this small piece that she wrote relating to Joseph and Joseph's story and some of the midot, the character strengths that we've been exploring. And what she says is, if I were to choose from the list of character strengths to describe Joseph, top of my list would be emunah, faith, and trust. He's strong in gevurah, discipline and willpower. He's also strong in anavah, humility. Remember his repeated insistence that it is not he who interprets dreams, but rather God flowing through him. He's strong in netzach, perseverance, and grit, which we'll get to in future weeks. These are the qualities I see revealed in who his life story has led him to become. There is so much that we can't control. including birth, family, and origin dynamics, how others treat us, when and whether we struggle with illness, etc. But Joseph's story is a reminder that we can choose what qualities we want to cultivate, both in years of emotional plenty and in years of spiritual famine. These qualities we choose to cultivate reveal who we are. When change or conflict or challenge offers us an opportunity to make ourselves known, who do we want to reveal ourselves to be?
Good.
That just, it stuck the nail on the head to me, especially when thinking about what it is that Joseph does, especially in that situation with Potiphar's wife and the choice that he chooses to make, the kind of choice that he makes, that no matter what it's going to do to his sense of security, it is most important for him to cultivate within himself emunah, cultivate within himself a high moral standard.
I think it's a great, we've talked about this a lot in this group in the time of COVID, which is the choice. Where do you choose to be? What do you choose to do? How do you choose to grow or not grow? It has been and continues to be a challenge. You know, there's opportunity both ways. I thought this, when I read it, was like particularly cogent for this time.
Absolutely. It goes back to this idea of choice. I think that really is the kind of string that's woven through all of this so powerfully that we really can relate to. Well, and because it's the week of Hanukkah, it felt appropriate as well to bring in a little bit of the story of Hanukkah here. And I was thinking in particular about the priest Mattathias and the choice that he was given to make. So he is kind of seeing everything that's going on. The temple has been destroyed. Many people who are among the Israelites are being convinced to kind of jump on board with the Syrian people, to eat pork, to, you know, disregard so much of what had been Jewish custom in order to preserve life, essentially. And the Syrian soldiers came to Mattathias and said, listen, you are a leader. We want you to show that you are on our side in front of all of these people. Make it better for yourself. Make it better for your people, and do what we ask you to do. Eat this pork, do all of this stuff. And what does he say in the book of Maccabees? Says, though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him and fall away, every one from the religion of their fathers, and give consent to his commandments, yet I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid that we shall forsake the law and the ordinances. And Mattathias cried through the city with a loud voice, saying, whoever is zealous of the law and maintains the covenant, let him follow me. That Mattathias is saying, no, here I am. I know I'm going to face consequences, but I'm going to do what I believe to be right. Now, I understand in bringing up this story, it is far more complicated than what I'm saying, and that there is going to be guerrilla warfare and all sorts of rather yucky things that take place throughout the Hanukkah story. But I think that in the gut of it, there is a parallel here between Joseph's choice that he makes and the choice that Mattathias makes, and just how difficult it is to make choices to our convictions when we are really pushed up against the wall. I want to just bring in one last text here, and then I'm going to close down the sheet so that we can just talk to one another, because there are so many big ideas here that give us a lot of room for thought, I think. The Rabbi Lisa Grant says, does God truly reward those who believe with emunah shlema, with a complete or perfect faith? Perhaps our answer to this question depends on how we understand reward. Faith may not help if material gain is our end goal. Still, if we are seeking to lead a good life, to make good choices and do what is right, and just in the eyes of our loved ones, our community, and God, then faith can play a determining role. Cultivating faith can lead to great patience, courage in facing hardship in the unknown, and acceptance that so much in life is beyond our control. Emunah is often confused with belief. Faith is not something to be understood intellectually or rationally. Rather, it needs to be learned from experience and deep reflection. Faith is not static. Like all other midot, it needs to be practiced and renewed constantly. One can grow in faith and one can lose faith. Faith can be seen as a kind of religious courage, as Rabbi Shai Held writes, as knowing God whether or not one sees him. As in the case of another midot, we may not see the immediate benefit of cultivating our faith. The inner work of listening for the divine voice as we strive to make good choices takes time. However, the moment we make a choice is the moment in which we consciously negotiate between our inclination to do good, our yetzer tov, and our inclination to give into bad habits and irresponsible behavior, yetzer hara. This act of ethical decision-making is at the heart of Musar. And when we make our decisions in light of the question, how is the divine manifest in me, through me, within me at this moment, we are acting in faith. There we go. So, I mean, now that we've gone through this text study and have kind of wrestled with it in the context of all of these texts, what is your understanding of faith? Has it changed in any way? Steve, you seem on the verge of saying something. Yes, Tom, go ahead. Steve, you're off the hook for right now.
Well, no, I was just going to say I really appreciated, kind of the distinction between faith and belief. And belief, a belief in something is not enough. Faith is more of something that you have to work and implement in your life as part of your Jewish life or your spiritual life. That is something you work at, and it ebbs and flows depending on all the other circumstances.
Thank you.
Just this is something I've struggled with for years, this concept. And we'll continue probably to do so for a while, if not forever.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of a conversation that I had in the Introduction to Judaism class that I'm doing, right? And a conversation that comes up in a lot of different places where people ask, isn't it good enough to just be a good person? Like, why do we need to dive into this? Why do we need to study all of this? And the answer I gave was that, well, it's really easy to get ourselves off the hook. It's really easy to say, I'm a good person. I don't need to work on anything. But what this is doing, what pushes all of us on, is to say, no, every single one of us has our soul curriculum, in the words of Alan Marinas, right? Every single one of us have things that we work on within ourselves in a spiritual capacity, right? This idea of faith, it's trying to figure out what is it that each of us need to continue to throw ourselves into. What are the choices we need to consciously make in order to be able to be the best versions of ourselves and to create more good in this world? And that really is a gift that our tradition gives to us if we choose to take it on.
No promise of reward.
Right.
And, that's where we differ with other religions. I'm not earning a place in heaven, or I'm not getting some, someone once said to me of another person, another religion, it says, prayer for me is asking for it. Meditation is waiting to receive it. It convolutes what it's all about. I mean, and people that sometimes do things out of fear of what may happen to you if you don't behave a certain way. But I struggle, as Steve said, I've been struggling for a long time since I left the yeshiva at age 13, had my bar mitzvah and said, I don't want to be Jewish anymore. And it took a while for me to even put my toe back in the water because I didn't even know there was anything other than Orthodox. So I've been struggling too.
Yeah.
Rabbi Cassi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Sorry.
So yeah, for me, this is really a difficult issue, faith, and I've struggled with it all my life because I lived with 2 Holocaust survivor parents. And I saw what it did to them. And they came from very large families, and families were massacred. And my mother was in concentration camp. And so where was God?
Mhm.
So I've been struggling with that. I really want to believe. And my mother used to say, even though she was in concentration camp, she used to say, I believe in God. My dad didn't. Because of all that happened. I mean, he remained Jewish, and Judaism was important to him, but he didn't believe that there was a God. So I struggle with that quite a bit, it feels like it would be so wonderful to believe, And I mean, I believe in Judaism and everything else. And I raised my kids to be Jewish, and evidently it's important to all 3 of them. So I must have instilled that love of Judaism, and this is who we are. We don't question that, But on the other hand, I have struggled with that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as you're saying that, so I have a grandfather, I had a grandfather. He's been dead for a while now. But he, as a young child, was deserted by his parents. He ended up living on his own at a young age. He lied to join the army early. He got married, had a child, and his first child at the age of 4 died to cancer. And he wanted nothing to do with faith because he was like, it's enough that I went through all this, but for my 4-year-old daughter to have had to suffer like that and die, I can't believe in God. But in my mind, he was absolutely a person of faith. He didn't believe in God. He didn't want anything to do with organized religion or prayer, but he was a man of faith. Why do I say that? Because he was a man who chose to believe in a better world, a man who acted with integrity, a man who always held himself up to the highest standards, and who set an example of how this world could be more loving and compassionate. I think that's what's meant by emunah here. Not believing in God.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that really, somehow puts it a bit more in perspective, which I need, And I guess the fact that I raised such good 3 sons that are such good human beings, incredibly good human beings, then, and the love of, being Jewish, so I must have had the faith, and I mean, I've never abandoned Judaism.
Yeah, but I think we wrestle, right? Like what happened in the Holocaust, what happened in for so many people.
Yeah.
It's horrific. There's no answer to that,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the fact that Joseph was able to act with integrity despite everything he went through, the fact that so many different Holocaust survivors and families who have suffered so much chose to have faith, chose to believe in a better world and to work for it. That is no small feat. That is absolutely remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, of course.
In a discussion with an Orthodox rabbi, he explained to me that in Orthodoxy, you don't have to believe in God to be an Orthodox Jew. That's the way he put it, and that would have never occurred to me until he told me that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other discussion too. What does it even mean
Right.
to believe in God? And who is the God you believe or don't believe in? But Tom, I know that you have something that you wanted to say.
Just, I know the time is short. Just real quickly, one thing that I really appreciated in the Musar commentary was that getting, just, in the line of emunah is something that we have to practice. Kind of if we want to be connected to the divine light or the inner voice, and one of the things they mentioned in there, which resonated, was that is something that spirituality, or that art of listening, is something that needs to be practiced and developed. It's not something necessarily that you just are clued in at all times. So, that kind of goes along with practicing emunah, or faith, and trying to get and hone your skills.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I hope that this Torah portion and this commentary can inspire all of us to kind of take the time to think about, its impact in our lives and the choices that we want to make, and where we decide to hone our own personal skills and midot, our soul qualities. So thank you so much. This has been really, really an enlightening discussion. And I look forward to next week, where we're going to move on to the next section of this story. And I hope to see you all for Hanukkah celebrations coming up, both on Friday night and on Sunday.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.